It's time for the annual reminder that DC, Marvel, basically US superhero comics are no longer the mainstream. It's actually manga and kids graphic novels. We've got the breakdown of graphic novel sales for 2021 in the US from MPD Bookscan. Now, some people have heard MPD Bookscan. They will also have heard the Comic Hub numbers. There's an enormous difference between the two. MPD Bookscan is essentially a vast, like an overwhelming majority of the actual market that it's giving you numbers for. Barnes and Noble, Walmart, Amazon, stuff like that. Big box bookstores. These are actual sales to customers. And these are very, very, very accurate. The Comic Hub sales are numbers tabulated from a very small cross-section of actual comic shops. So it's a different market, same product, different market that's actually much smaller. The vast majority of the enormous growth that the comic pros were championing of comic books, we saw all this comic book growth, a vast, overwhelming majority is actually from bookstores, which is what MPD Bookscan is going to tell us what those numbers are. And it is quite dramatic. It paints a very ugly picture for DC and Marvel. And I think some people will be out there, but Wes, you just hate Marvel and DC. You're going to make this as bad as you can. Well, no, I don't. I wish I was the person championing how amazing DC and Marvel are, and they were having exceptional growth, but it wasn't even enough because the quality was so high that it warrants more. Unfortunately, I'm the person that's warning the entire comic book industry that they're leading themselves into complete obscurity. They're making themselves a niche inside of an enormous genre that is comic books, and manga has absolutely pants them for the last several years, and it shows no signs of stopping. So these are the numbers that we do have from MPD Bookscan. Manga sales account for an astonishing 76% of all comics and graphic novels in the US sold 2021 within bookstores. That is 3/4 of the mark. Are you sure that DC and Marvel are still mainstream? I'm certain that they're not. Now let's get into some of the numbers themselves and really paint this terrible picture as far as American comic books. Manga sales alone led to a 107% increase in adult graphic novel sales. That is the category which they are part of. They essentially on their own doubled sales for the entire category in 2021. Manga sold 15 million more copies than they did in 2020 for an unfathomable 171% rise in sales. Overall, graphic novel sales in 2021 were up 65% from 2020. In fact, 21 million more graphic novels were sold in 2021 than in 2020. Think about that. In total, they sold 21 million more graphic novels. 15 million of that was manga. And remember, we are in the middle of a manga shortage. There are manga that there are people, they have their name on a list and they're waiting for the thing just to be printed. But they haven't been able to print as much manga, so there's more demand than there is supply, and they're still breaking records with the numbers that they're selling. Now let's get into the superhero graphic novel sales. They sold 2.3% more units in 2021 than in 2020. And we also have to take into account that in 2020, there are large portions of the economy in the US that were actually shut down. You would have expected more growth than that. Superhero comics sold over 2 million copies in 2021. Which doesn't sound too bad. 2 million copies, not too bad. But it looks far worse when you consider that Dav Pilkey's Dogman Mothering Heights sold 1.2 million copies on its own in 2021. It is not only probable, it is almost likely fact that Dogman by Dav Pilkey sold more graphic novels than all of Marvel and DC. Are you sure DC and Marvel the mainstream? I'm certain that they're not. Even though I love Marvel and DC characters, I don't like the current state of either one of them. But this certainly helps paint the very dark picture that they're actually in. Tim Seeley can say, sales are going up. Yes, sales are going up, but not for anything you've written or anything you or your peers are contributing to, unfortunately. This is not surprising. We have seen manga absolutely dominate the top 20 sales every single month when it comes to MPD Bookscan. We rarely ever see a DC or a Marvel title, even if they're new and even if there was a big event or something, sneak into that top 20. But there is another troubling trend that has been coming through lately. This is fairly recent. Manga jumping into the Comic Hub top 20 graphic novel sales. We're even seeing some of the Dav Pilkey books get in there. That means, or at least it indicates, that a large portion of comic shops out there are realizing there are sales to be made on manga and kids graphic novels, potentially much larger sales than they're actually going to get from DC, Marvel, and the traditional superhero comics that they've been essentially relying on for 34 years now. There's an enormous trend happening. There's a wind change happening in the industry. Some comic shops are starting to see that, and rather than just give those sales to Barnes & Noble, Walmart, Amazon, Books A Million, they say we want to be part of that too. Let's allocate some of our bookshelf, remove the DC, remove some Marvel stuff, maybe remove some Image stuff, and let's replace it with some manga and see what happens. And we're starting to see manga jump into that top 20 as well. We hadn't really seen that before. An even more troubling sign for U.S. comics as far as manga goes, it doesn't appear that this is a one-hit wonder. It's not being pushed by one title that's really so far above all the others that it's bringing the category up with it, which is what kind of Dav Pilkey and his Dogman and all that stuff is doing. My Hero Academia is no longer the top dog as far as manga sales. Demon Slayer, One Punch Man, Attack on Titan, Berserk all sold better than My Hero Academia in 2021. Right behind them are Jujutsu Kaisen and Chainsaw Man, who appear primed to jump into those top spots next year and certainly overtake My Hero Academia. We know that Chainsaw Man's anime is about to be coming out, probably going to be on Netflix. It's going to drive even more sales for that title. Manga in itself is the selling point now. There were a couple of interviews recently on ICV2.com, which is where I kind of go for all these sales numbers, with some executives within the manga industry, and they had some interesting things to say that I wanted to point out. These first question and answers are from Yen Press Deputy Publisher and Editor-in-Chief Ju-Yoon Lee. How is the market and the manga world in general different from the pre-COVID times? One of the biggest things in recent years would be web comics. Not just what's coming from Korea, but Japan has also slowly been moving online, and I believe COVID accelerated that change. This is something that yours truly has talked here on the channel, how it was absolutely insane for DC and Marvel, and essentially all of Western comics, US comics, to just say, you know what, Amazon, you handle our digital comic strategy with Comixology. We saw what happened recently. They are so far behind the eight ball, it's not even funny. Webtoons is enormous. Shonen Jump is enormous. The ability for customers to get a hold of the product that they want, if it's not available in stores, certainly if it's on a device, makes it more accessible and pocketable to take your collection with you when you're going on a trip or something, if you're at a subway or whatnot. The fact that it's so readily available digitally absolutely gives manga an enormous advantage over DC, Marvel, and the rest of the Western comics industry. Next question. Are you seeing any particular series or genres stand out? Are manga that have anime adaptations doing better than others? Everything sold in 2021. It's one of those dream times for an editor where you can take risks on books that you might have hesitated to otherwise and watch them find the right audience. Now that is somebody that understands business. One of the dumbest things that I've seen from Marvel and DC the last 5 years are unnecessary risks. They're taking an enormous amount of risk with their characters in their universe, almost monthly at this point, but they're not in an upswing. There's no safety net beneath them with an enormous amount of recent success where they can take more risks with their characters. Their sales have gone down, the interest in their product are going down or staying stagnant, and they're taking more risks and driving more people away, meaning they're having to do more stunt marketing and whatnot. It's absolutely insane. And another reason I think manga is absolutely pantsing the U.S. market as far as graphic novel sales, there are a lot of manga that are released on the Shonen Jump, weekly magazine that never get a trade. They never get collected because there was never enough interest in the story or the title, or whatever, and it just never caught on with people. So they never release it like it's important. So when you see a manga that's been collected, there's a general feeling from the customer that there is a quality story waiting for them inside there because they don't release everything in this format. Fucking DC and Marvel release everything. It doesn't matter how putrid or dog shit or how much people hated the fucking story. It's all going to get a release because they need the graphic novel sales. As you can see, Dogman sold more than Marvel and DC combined. It ain't doing that much. And it's definitely hurt the brand and stagnated sales of DC and Marvel graphic novels. When everyone else is having massive amounts of growth, they aren't. Because when you look at a DC or a Marvel graphic novel, a trade, you wonder if this was done in the last 10 years, there's a fucking 70% chance that story absolutely sucks. And they fucking printed it anyway and made it seem special. Well, it's not. And it's fucking diluted the brand, and it's killed interest. Well, it hasn't completely killed interest, but it's certainly stagnated interest and pushed customers to other alternatives like manga. They have done this to themselves, people. ICV2.com also talked to Viz Media Vice President Kevin Hamrick. They asked him, can you characterize the 2021 growth rate? It's phenomenal, outstanding, unexpected, magnificent. Pick an adjective. It was incredible. According to MPD Bookscan, manga sales grew 160% in 2021. That number is a bit lower than when I presented earlier because there was a miscalculation, because they actually misreported the actual growth and they attributed My Hero Academia to the wrong category. But it's been fixed now. It's 171%, which was on top of a 46% growth in 2020. The manga category itself was attributed with 25% of the overall growth of the comic industry in the US last year. That's incredible. I've been in this business quite a long time. I don't ever recall a subcategory driving the overall industry. Manga sales in book chains attributed to 25% of the entire growth of the entire industry, regardless of where it was sold. Amazing. You can only hope for a growth period like this, and I just don't see it on the horizon for DC, Marvel, or other U.S. comic companies because they're making so many mistakes. They need to learn what manga are doing. He was also asked, has anything changed as far as the manga shortage? We interviewed you last July about availability and had a general sense about what was going on then. Has anything changed in the last 9 months? Nothing. We're not going to be out of this supply chain issue for the rest of the calendar year at least. It could continue into 2023. The printers are at capacity. We just announced our fall list. We're having to give estimates to printers for those titles all the way through December at this point. There's not enough paper. For titles that are printed overseas, just getting a book out to a ship is an issue. Even though most of our titles are printed domestically, there's still trucking issues. Despite the logistical nightmare that manga are experiencing right now, whether it be domestic printing, overseas printing, to get their product into the stores here, people aren't losing faith because the product is hot right now. The product exactly what people want, and they're willing to wait for it. And that is something that is amazing. It's crazy that in this type of shortage, the great manga shortage of 2021, they still broke enormous sales records. I've talked on here plenty of times about the enormous mistake DC and Marvel were doing, letting Comixology be the main distributor of digital comics. For the traditional North American comic book industry, it certainly blew up in their faces worse than I would have imagined, but they would have watched my channel. They would have seen it coming because we said that was stupid. I do want to say, if you're interested in manga, but you're not willing to throw down the $2 for Shonen Jump, I do have something that they're offering right now. Manga Plus is offering to let people read entire collections of Dragon Ball Super, One Piece, Jujutsu Kaisen, Dr. Stone, My Hero Academia, Spy Family, and more for free. According to Shueisha, a select number of titles will be accessible to users for free for the next year. As part of this initiative, chapters can be read once for free before they are locked away behind a paywall. This campaign was created to celebrate the Manga Plus app's 3rd anniversary. Users can only access the free chapters through the app. If you're interested in manga, but you don't want to pay for it, there you go. You get an entire year to read up on some of the best-selling manga out there, limited portions of them. You can see if it's what you want. Can you imagine DC or Marvel giving away vast parts of their library for free for a year in total with the confidence that their product was so damn good that you wouldn't be able to say no when it was time to pay? That's why manga is pantsing them, because they know they have a good product. They know people, once they get a taste of it, are not going to be able to turn themselves away. Tim Seeley and a lot of other people in the U.S. comic book industry would like to tell you that they are a part of the enormous growth going on within comic books. They are not. It's all happening in spite of DC and Marvel's best efforts to kill the comic book industry. Manga is showing them the way. They have not learned a damn thing over the last several years. Manga's not looking back. You're only going to get the best stories from them, and they're only going to continue to raise sales while DC and Marvel fumble the ball and wonder what they're going to do next. It's a sad thing, but it's absolutely happening. If you needed another reminder of just how bad sales are, at least for DC Comics, I made this video not too long ago talking about DC Comics sales in January of 2022. The self-inflicted harm to their entire publishing library outside of Batman is astounding. It's horrifying when you look at it, but you have to see what's actually going on and see why DC is really dropping the ball.